Ambassador Dr. Raza Mohammed, President of IPRI. I would also like to take this opportunity to sincerely thank and compliment Ambassador Nadeem Riaz, President of Institute of Regional Studies, and his team for organizing this very exhaustive 3 days of the second edition of International Conference Regional Dialogue, focusing on the contemporary, traditional and non-traditional threats in South Asia. In this session on the future of comprehensive security on South Asia, as the chair mentioned, I will be speaking on the revival of SAARC or its replacement. Good morning to all my friends, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by saying that definitely since the 19th summit meeting of SAARC was postponed indefinitely in November of 2016, this question has been haunting us all the time as to how and when we can think of reviving SAARC summit meetings and other apex level meetings between South Asian countries. Let me address this question of SAARC revival or replacement. I would like to begin by first talking of the immediate challenge that SAARC is facing, almost existential challenge of replacement of the current Secretary General of SAARC Secretariat. Ambassador Isala Ruwan Weerakoon had joined as Secretary General on 1st of March 2018, and his term, he represents Sri Lanka, and his term comes to an end of next month. So the first issue of replacement, which is immediate and existential for the functioning of SAARC and functioning of SAARC Secretariat, is to find out replacement for Ambassador Weerakoon. Indeed, the problem is that the next country, as far as alphabetic order goes of nominating Secretary Generals, is Afghanistan. And we all understand that the current Taliban regime in Afghanistan is not recognized by any of the other 7 member nations of SAARC. So how to find a solution? Some kind of negotiations have been happening between various countries, but so far there is no solution visible, and the SAARC Charter doesn't say anything on this as to how a situation like this can be tackled. In my mind, there are 4 possibilities that can happen. One, which I think some countries, including Nepal, is inclined to, is to extend or maybe even give another term to Ambassador Weerakoon so that the continuity is maintained. Now, that may not be acceptable to some other countries. So there is also a possibility then of Nepal as chair nominating finally in matter of crisis, representing Nepal, and whenever Nepal's turn comes, then of course we would jump to the next country. The third possibility is to, sort of overstep Afghanistan and jump to the next alphabetic order and ask Bangladesh to nominate the next Secretary General, which again, I'm sure some countries, including Pakistan, may not be very comfortable in such a decision. And fourth and final could be Taliban still proposes a name, claiming that they are members and it is their turn. But issue here is that so far on none of these so-called possibilities, there is any consensus. On each of these issues, countries have different views. So to me, that is a replacement that I think SAARC has to immediately address and deal with. Now, let me go to the second element of my discussion in terms of long-term pending issue of last 6 or 7 years in terms of seeking replacement or revival of SAARC. I think let me rule out replacement argument first. The most basic understanding I have is that so far as I know, none of the 8 members have formally expressed a desire to withdraw or leave SAARC. That means all the 8 nations continue to have a full faith in SAARC being useful, and therefore to me, replacement is not in discussion. What is in discussion is revival of SAARC and how to revive that SAARC. And in looking at the revival of SAARC, I do want to underline that SAARC has had a history of setbacks and troubles even before. So this is not the first time. And despite all the limitations, SAARC has had substantive and tangible outcomes that we can all pride on. And one can go back to 1987 Convention on Terrorism, and SAARC was the first around the world to do such a feat of an agreement on such a difficult task. Now, we do understand that the apex level meetings, including the head of state summit meeting or council of ministers meeting, or even the standing committee of the foreign secretaries, have not been able to meet for last 7 years or more. But let us remember that SAARC Secretariat is still active and is functioning. And therefore, not just SAARC Secretariat is functioning, but all the specialized bodies of SAARC. New Delhi, for example, has South Asian University, or we also have SAARC Arbitration Council, SAARC Development Fund, SAARC Regional Standards Organization. They are all active. So I understand some elements of SAARC are not functional, but some other are still functional. In fact, one could go back and look at all the institutions. There's a plethora of associations, including, I think, last week meeting of the SAARC journalists meeting. So a lot of SAARC is still active and happening, and I think there is too much of overlooking of that element where SAARC is still functioning. I understand the apex level meetings are not happening, so I would not look at this as some experts call it SAARC in coma or SAARC being moribund. I think to me SAARC is basically partially dysfunctional. And I say partially because, even in 2017, for example, you would remember SAARC had launched satellite for South Asia. And some of the other events have happened. Now that takes me to the next third element of my discussion to you as to when inordinate challenges come upon South Asian nations, it has seen, it's like Afghans saying that cousins fight until enemies arrive. So whenever challenges have appeared, we have seen countries coming together. And the most significant challenge that we faced lately was pandemic. And we saw that SAARC did get activated during the pandemic. On 15th of March 2020, SAARC even held, on invitation of Indian Prime Minister, a virtual summit meeting of SAARC leaders. And of course, several initiatives happened in that. The most important was the COVID-19 Emergency Fund, where India had immediately pledged about $10 billion, and it was reciprocated by other countries. And the total fund, I think, raised up to more than $18 million during that time. SAARC Disaster Management Centre had set up a online website to produce daily update on South Asian situation on the pandemic. SAARC Development Fund had also, I think, collected additional $5 million. So in that sense, even Pakistan had offered to host a meeting of SAARC health ministers. So I understand there are hiccups, there are disjunctions, but it's not, I think, an issue where one could talk about replacement of SAARC. I think we are all discussing fundamentally some kind of revival of SAARC here. And I dare say if you compare the other regional organizations which are often, proposed as examples which SAARC must learn and sort of work upon, I dare say that regional organizations like European Union or even ASEAN, I don't think fared as much in addressing the issue of pandemic as SAARC did. So in some ways, I'm underlining replacement is not in discussion, revival is in discussion, and of course, there are challenges in that revival. And let me also say the fourth and last point that I want to discuss here is this whole insinuation or kind of allegation often made that perhaps SAARC is likely to be replaced by some other regional or sub-regional organization. And we often hear names of BIMSTEC or BBIN or Indian Ocean Regional Association and so on, that perhaps they are going to be the alternatives and they're going to really replace SAARC and SAARC will get marginalized. I'm not someone who believes that. I think each of these organizations, associations have a very different mandate, have a very different bandwidth of their focus. SAARC is very distinct and SAARC has been there for 38 years. And I don't believe SAARC has disappeared. And, the whole regionalization process of South Asia, which is civilizational, cultural, historical, is very different. And I think that is something that will not be and cannot be overlooked. Now, how do we deal with that revival of regionalization? How do we reactivate SAARC? I understand that, Dr. Sadia Soleiman just mentioned that I think at core of it lies some kind of equations that exist between India and Pakistan and that have often impacted upon whether in accelerating the positive synergies or in creating new obstacles. So India-Pakistan relations, I do understand, lie at the core of the challenge here. And I do agree with Dr. Suleiman in terms of several suggestions that he has made. She has made suggestions on conflict management. So I fully endorse several of these suggestions that Dr. Sadia Suleiman has made. And I think once we are able to address this core problem of India-Pakistan relations, it will be easier to then work on revival of SAARC. And I dare say, even between India and Pakistan, and there have been positive sparks once in a while, and it's not like completely closed relationship. I remember last year when India wanted to request Pakistan to create railroad, the kind of road access to India to send humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan. It worked. So Pakistan allowed the land route for India's humanitarian assistance to go to Taliban. So it's not that India-Pakistan relations have absolutely no possibilities of finding positive synergies. I hope some of the suggestions made by Dr. Sadia Suleiman can be really thought of, can be worked upon. And once we are able to, put India-Pakistan relations on rails, then I think revival of SAARC would become far more easier to achieve. But it is as much my guess as yours as to how easy or difficult the task of resolving India-Pakistan equations is. So I wouldn't venture to start speculating in that direction. I do want to thank Institute of Regional Studies to have a discussion on the subject like revival of SAARC, and to request me and ask me to share my thoughts on the subject. I hope I have made some sense to my audience. I look forward to your comments, and in case you have any questions, I will be happy to respond to those questions. With that, I hand it back to the chair, the Ambassador Mohammed.
Thank you so much, Dr. Singh. Very enlightening. And I think Dr. Swan Singh has stressed upon one thing, that SAARC may be partially dysfunctional, not completely dysfunctional. There are certain organizations, certain organs, certain institutions which are under the SAARC, they are still functional and working. What lacks is the summit meetings or the apex meeting, what he said. And we do not, as he says, foresee towards the replacement of SAARC with someone, but the best option would be a revival and rejuvenation of the SAARC. Dr. Singh, are you going to stay with us, or we can go to the question answers for you?
I'll be happy to stay with you, sir, for the whole session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Then